Mic is good. Awesome. So I'm not sure if you're hearing the client. There was some weird stuff was happening with, even though my system was muted, I was still hearing audio. But anyways, so welcome everyone to our latest edition of a casual stroll through Lord of the Rings Online. My name is Matt Elliott, otherwise known as Scenario on the message boards. I'm a senior world designer for Lord of the Rings Online, and have been doing this for a while now, probably close to 20 years. Not all on Lord of the Rings, but we're having a special treat for you this time because we're going through Ered Luin, which is actually one of the very first regions I ever worked on. And there's also a lot of my very, very old artwork on display in this region from when this project was built online. So we're going to be able to dive right into that. So today's also an exciting day. We've got the Brawler and the new legendary item system out there in the world for everyone to play with. As I've said before, this stream is intended to be purely focused on world design, so while I'm sure you are excited both about the Brawler and about the legendary item system and about a whole slew of other things, I'm only going to be talking about world design stuff today. Certainly happy to answer your questions as they pertain to that. Without further ado, I would say let's get it going. One of the first questions is, have I got my drink? Yes, I do. I've got a Canada Dry ginger ale and I've got some water here. So if it's been a while before you see me like pause and take a drink, please let me know and I will. I'll take a drink. And so we are in a weird space right now because of the way Ered Luin is in general, and most newbie areas are. My character is currently in a weird state, but I'm going to get him out of this weird state and get us on our tour of Ered Luin. I figured it would be best for us to start, up here, up in the north in Thorin's Hall, and then work our way down through the Vales of Thrain and through the other areas of the region, and then we'll check out some behind the scenes. Stuff that is probably never going to see the light of day, but it's sometimes fun to go back and take a look at those things. So let me fix my location real quick. And I will turn that off and get on my goat. I was planning to brawler it up a little bit, but did not have the time to dress my character accordingly. But here we are. It is kind of late at night, so how about we start our tour by going right into Thorin's Hall itself. At the time of the launch of the game, this was probably our biggest and most ambitious dungeon space that we'd ever created. We were really using it to test the capabilities of what we call our M rooms, just these large dungeon interior spaces. And it is interesting, like running around in this kind of space now compared to when we first built it, because when we first built it, I think we had in our heads this idea that this was like a big chunky space that could be a little performance heavy for our taste. It was maybe a little bit too high detail for our taste. And then you compare it to the stuff that we have out there in the game now, and the level of detail that we have in a space like this, and in a lot of our older regions that haven't gotten significant overhauls, comes across as a little low detail. There have been some times where I've even thought about if I could, and if I had the time for it, I would sit down and copy Thorin's Hall out and turn it into a landscape space, kind of like what we did with for Erebor, the city portions of Erebor, not the hall itself for the Allegiance Hall, but the city space, and try to do something similar, or like what we had done in Moria, and kind of try to give Thorin's Hall a bit more of a majestic Moria feel. Again, if only we had the time. But I remember spending a lot of time building this space in particular and thinking about how we want to do town services, how we want to have the different wings set up, you know, the different effects that we can apply here. We had an artist that did this awesome, you know, heat shimmer effect for when you get close to these forges, and as well as a little bit of a fire effect on top of that. I think I remember early on in beta players accidentally dying on that, or sorry, becoming defeated on the forges because they got a little bit too close, or you know, they just weren't paying too much attention to what was happening. So I do love the music in this space. It's just kind of this, I don't know, it's a little sad, it's a little happy. The horns are great. One change that we did make recently to this space, and this is by and large just driven by kind of my own frustrations in here, is you'll note that I am not getting dismounted at the moment. One of the portions of the dungeon, since it was considered kind of a social space, we disabled the ability for mounts to be ridden around and down into the tavern, and that was largely because we wanted to maintain the feel of it being a social space. But especially during festivals and just doing content in here, it was actually kind of frustrating to get like dismounted basically as soon as you get down to the bottom of the stairs. One of the other fun bits of trivia about this space too is it's one of the first spaces where we started experimenting with the connected dungeon map system. So if you look up at the little radar disc, you'll see I go from one Thorin's Hall map into another Thorin's Hall map. And this is really kind of the proof of concept for that piece of technology way back when too. Certainly has gotten a little bit darker in here since the new attenuated lighting system went into place, because a lot of these light sources feathered a bit more than they do now, because the lighting affects by pixel as opposed to vertices. I don't think I'll be able to get into this quite yet. But eventually. I'll teleport us in there so we can take a look at it. So I will make my way back out of, well, make my way down to Thorin's throne, and then take a quick pause to look at some questions, so that we can see what people are asking. I'm going to take a drink. I love the mirror effect too. This is a lot of fun when we get to use it. It's a little tricky to place sometimes because it's hard to actually see in our tools, but when it's placed right, it looks great. There we go, here's Dwellin. Alright, do a quick look at some questions. So Shoreless Skies asks, is there a way for us to measure the scale to keep things consistent? I'm thinking about the underground space versus Moria versus Gundabad. Whenever we build a space, at least for my own building purposes, we have scale reference models. They're like super simplified versions of an average avatar's height. And sometimes we'll also bring in, avatar artwork or NPC artwork. So one of the things that I was building very recently, which I can't talk about yet, while I was building it, I had like 30 or 40 different scale reference models placed all around in different spots, just so that I could make sure that, a walkway didn't seem like it was too big or too small. But sometimes we want to have, oh, I can't use that yet. Sometimes we want to have that kind of like big open space that seems like a little bit off scale. Alright, and then we'll set A2. give us a little bit of sunlight while we walk around. So Iwanar says, these are very elaborate halls for a wandering exile. You have to wonder why Thorin needed to retake Erebor so badly. Couldn't he just expand his existing holds in Ered Luin? But I guess that's a story question. So I think some of that is, wanting to make sure from a game perspective that we deliver on certain experiences when you come into the space. Not really, like, knowing that we eventually wanted to get to Moria, but not really knowing if we would be able to get to Moria at the time that we were building all of this. We wanted to make sure that we could have a space that kind of felt like a grand dwarf hall. That may be a bend a little bit in the lore, but ultimately we wanted to make sure that we were kind of hitting the notes. We also, I think, as far as the character of our dwarves anyways, and how we represent them in Lotro, they tend to go a bit big. They tend to go big or go home kind of when it comes to their architecture. I mean, you look at right up here with the statue of him, the statue of Thorin himself, up in the mountains. I think that's a pretty good example of kind of their motives when it comes to leaving their impression on the world. And I'll have to get to a different vantage point in order to really see the statue. So, how many dwarf holdings have indoor rivers? It seems a very risky thing to have. Rivers can experience floods, and that can be really bad indoors. Yeah, there are examples of rivers running through cave systems, running through mountains and whatnot out there in the world. So it's not out of the question that something like that could exist. I think in that instance, I think we were trying to sell a little bit the story of the waterway that flows out of the mountain here and further into the south into inaccessible areas. We can see the statue of Thorin up there. Certainly not as impressive as what is out in the Ironfold, but it's his own little piece of land. How do you begin the process of designing an interior space? Do you start with a floor plan? So I think it varies a little bit from person to person. For me, I like to sketch it out, whether that is actually busting out my tablet monitor here to the side and actually physically drawing a map, or being in our world builder tools and doing some very rough blockouts of a space, just kind of using our dungeon shells or our landscape to roughly sculpt out how we want the space to be. Different designers work in different ways. Often for instances, we usually ask our content designers and encounter designers to give us a floor plan for what they want out of the space, the kinds of hallways and rooms and whatnot that they want for their encounters. And then we kind of work with that blueprint to more fully realize the space. And there may be opportunities for us as we're building to be like, oh, well, this would really be really cool if there was a another hallway here, another cave here. I think one of the things with the mission system that has been really kind of a lot of fun is a lot of those spaces are not spaces that are particularly a lot of those spaces are not spaces that have a lot of direction associated with them. We have a general theme for what a given set of missions is going to be about, and then we can kind of just go, and kind of let our imagination go. So for the stuff in Elderslade, it was really the designers being like, we want 15 dungeon spaces for the mission system, and I was able to just kind of take that and just be like, do you ask them if there were any high level needs that they wanted to have met with that, and then if there weren't, then I could just kind of let my imagination run wild to come up with those spaces. And we've done something similar with the Gundabad missions as well, with like some high level just like ideas, and then we just run with it. Druid's Fire says, "Ooh, stuff you can't talk about yet." Yeah, so we are, forging ahead on our efforts beyond Gundabad now. The world team in particular, we're all diving into stuff that is post update 31, which is nice to be able to kind of start the next thing, and it's nice to get out ahead of our content team as well. I think that's one of the things where the way world design operates best is if we're able to have a conversation with our content designers pretty early on, and then from there just start kind of building carte blanche and work towards what their ultimate high level ideas are. And it allows us a little bit of an opportunity to kind of put our mark on the spaces that are being built as well. And Shoreless Sky says, "A wild turbine logo appears." I missed that. Not sure where it was, but hey, maybe we can track that down. What modern technology would you love to have in Lotro? I would love, I think the per pixel lighting attenuation system, I think, is easily one of the best additions to Lord of the Rings Online, but I would really love a full modern HDR lighting system that isn't as restrictive as our current lighting system is. It's just there are a lot of things that you could do with better and more accurate lighting than we currently have available to us, and it would be really great to be able to do that. Okay, the logo appeared in our debug windows. All right, well, I will make sure to talk with some folks to see what changes, if any, need to be made there. Thank you. So this area back up here, originally when we were building this, we were thinking about building north. But as we kind of honed in more and more on the direction that we wanted the story of the game to go, the less and less it made sense for us to travel north. And the funny thing is, with regards to the game when it was Middle Earth Online, let's back up. A lot of the landscape all around Ered Luin had little towns and villages dotted all over the place. Some of which we'll see in a little bit. I remember receiving these assets when we were working on this space, and just how great they felt and how different they were from just working with the dwarf stuff, which was very square and rectangular, and we have this elf stuff which is it still has flat sides, but it's got a bit more of a rounded appearance to it, which was just a very different way to work. Because you have to think differently in terms of how you use the assets, how you place the assets. It is weird, just kind of walking around here with there being nothing in here. Am I even in the right spot? Yes, okay. Making sure I'm not in a weird state for you all. So we need more Blue Mountains in Lotro. I think I think that's something that, given time, we would love to do that too. There's certainly, I think, we have a greater agency to kind of go in and fill in the world now than we did previously, because I think we were kind of beholden to see the end of the ring, and once we got to Mordor, that kind of like opened up the doors for us to start looking at and exploring other areas of the world, and even looking back and tinkering in spaces that we'd been before. It does make it a little weird because sometimes those areas may not be able to fit into the story quite as neatly, just because a lot of our areas are region locked, or not region locked, time locked. So like Wildwood, the story in there was a little tricky to like tie into happenings around the world, because the story was set in a certain way, and there's certain expectations of player level when you go in there, and where are the players in the world, in the epic story, when they might come back here to do this sort of thing. So we have to dance around that a little bit. So let's see. Going down through some more questions. My sky is a little bugged at the moment, but that's okay. It'll look pretty while we're running around here. Are there any other paths to the Grey Havens besides the barricaded roads at the south end of Rath Tareg? I mean, there are. Are they ones that are accessible? Are they ones that are built yet? TBD. We have. I think for me, my greatest regret with Lord of the Rings was we launched it without connecting the Shire to Ered Luin, and one of these days, hopefully, we'll be able to resolve that, and that'll put us, like, if not in contact with things like the Grey Havens, but in viewing distance of those. It's when that day comes, I will be a very happy person and will happily jump on building that connection. So one of the things too that I wanted to talk about a little bit was, as far as like landscape features that seemed like something that was like really interesting, exciting, is you see how this snow line here is running along the cliff edge. This was a kind of a new feature that was introduced for our terrain textures as part of building all of this. And what it really is whenever we paint terrain textures, the brushes that we use are usually like a little bit soft. They're fuzzy around the edges so that we can blend well. These terrain textures here are set up so that that blending, that smoothing doesn't really exist, and we can adjust that on a scale. So the designer that set these up this is actually two terrain textures. There's the normal snow, and then there's a darker snow underneath it, and they both overlap and try to create the illusion of like a soft edge with shadow underneath it. So Druid's Fire says, I'm hearing a lot of praise for the hook consolidation among our housing community. I'm happy that it's live. I think it's live. It's either live now or will be going live soon, but based off of that, it sounds like it is live now. That was a project that I've wanted to do since the beginning of the year, and had the work all done and ready to go for update 29, but unfortunately just the timing of it, we didn't have enough time to properly QA it. So I didn't want to just put it out there without having it being tested to make sure that, people don't lose their items. The drawback to the consolidation was small hooks, which could previously tilt, no longer do that. They now rotate. So if you had stuff on small wall hooks, they might need some adjustment. But otherwise, this system should give you a lot more flexibility as far as how you use your housing items. And I believe I added a little bit of an increased range for movement on those hooks as well. So Iwanar says, any lesser known Easter eggs like the snowman on top of the hill, but not entered into the wiki. Well, speaking of the snowman on top of the hill, he is right here. I have talked about in the past how one of our designers did etch his and his partner's name or initials into one of the trees in the southern portions of Ered Luin. I do not know exactly where that tree is anymore, but I believe that tree still exists with the little heart and initials on it. And when I discovered some of the stuff that he had done in Ered Luin, like sneakily, or not Ered Luin, Evendim, sneakily signing his name on the landscape with terrain types, he said that there were other things out there like that in the world. So I'm sure there are things written in invisible ink, names and birth dates and whatnot, written on the world in invisible ink that I am unaware of. Druid's Fire says, can we get a hint or tease for the next major housing update? You said on the forums, kin houses were going to return in it. It is being worked on, but we have nothing to talk about in regards to it quite yet. We want to get past Gundabad, get Gundabad out the door before focusing too heavily on the next things that you'll all be experiencing. Gundabad's big, it's a lot of work, and we're all excited about it, and we're looking forward to, letting you all play through it. And I can move again. Maybe. But we're not stopping. We're continuing on. We're getting stuff going. Pardon me, my server is a little upset with me right now. Up in Hunter's Notch. One of the things when we were building out Ered Luin was trying to figure out how we do enemy camps for natural threats. Things like bears, lynx, birds, because this was really a lot of Lotro, a lot of what we propagated out through the rest of the game started here. This was kind of our first region. The Shire, while the Shire and Breland were being built, this was already pretty well built from its times in Middle-earth Online, and what it came down for us was figuring out what the content was in this space. Polishing how the landscape and the textures were used, and building the monster camps. And I think we probably had, or at least originally, some monster camps that in the early game that were more complex than they really should have been for such a early game experience. The Shire in particular had some goblin camps that, even though they weren't group statted, were pretty rough if you weren't of a particular level. So the road past Sarnar, that gate is still closed. And it's actually... So Sarnar is... There's a bit of trivia here because, we were... In the update that we were going to introduce both this dungeon up here and the Barrow dungeons. we were trying to figure out what to call this space, and what stuck in my head was there were, and we'll go look at what the original Mio Sarnar looked like towards the end of the stream. Speed up my run. So we were trying to figure out a name, and I had in my head like seen the telepad information for a place called Sarnar, and in its original locations it felt like kind of similar. So we were like, oh well, let's call it Sarnar, and let's make this our Lotro version of Sarnar, since we're not going to be using the Mio version of Sarnar. So this originally was one big dungeon space, and has, like the Barrow dungeon in Breland, has since gotten broken up into other smaller spaces. But this was originally connected. And this was kind of a test to see how big we could make a dungeon. I think the Barrow dungeon was kind of a test to see how complex we could make a dungeon, and this one is very much a test to see how expansive we could make one. I think the original one, which was all connected and everything, probably a bit too massive, thus needing to be broken down in the way it was. But I don't think that stopped us from making larger dungeons going forward. I think we have some pretty impressively, significantly large dungeon spaces. And these kinds of spaces like this help provide us the learning to make them. Now watch as I get lost in my own dungeon. It's interesting, the like I was saying before too, just like the difference in level of detail compared to what we strive for now. What we considered acceptable at one point and what we strive for now are just like two very different things. So was Sarnar in the original release of the game? It was not. I forget which update post-launch. I think it was... So we had a cadence for... we had a cadence for our updates that was kind of like on and off, where we'd do a region and then we would do a smaller epic story update patch after that. And I believe this and the Barrow dungeon came out after Evendim, I think. I think we did, we launched the game, then we had Evendim, then we had these come out. I think. But it has been a long time. So another question from Soft Snake is, why don't we see the old dwarvish building style in newer areas? I think part of it is the set that we use heavily now is a very comprehensive and very flexible set for us, and it makes it more appealing and easier to use when it comes to building out spaces. The set that we just ran through and these pieces, they are less as comprehensive of a set, which means that often we would end up needing to supplement some of the Moria style stuff in there anyways. So it just, and because they're stylistically very different, it just has made it easier for us to use the newer set going forward. So Mirialis says, kind of a shame that these spaces aren't really challenging anymore for on-level players. Back in the day, you'd have to have a group to group up for Sarner. So many great memories. And I think so. I think the challenge system that are on the 2 legendary servers can kind of help you get some of that back. I think that's part of why those were introduced, was as a way for players to, kind of relive, I don't want to say relive the glory days, but like to relive a version of the world that was a little bit more challenging and harsher for them. Oh, I'm being told to drink. I remember playing through an alpha and beta in the North Downs and going through the Orc Valley there, and how much fun it could be, but also how challenging it could be to get through all of that if you'd you got a quarter of the way through and then someone needed to log out, so the whole team would log out and say okay, we'll come back tomorrow to keep pushing forward. And then there's the whole okay, now that we're here, how do we get out? And unfortunately, a lot of the times with those challenging spaces, the easiest solution for getting out of them was to just let yourself be defeated. A road that may or may not ever be opened. Open that door. I think one of these days there will certainly be, everyone has their own little spots in the world that they want to see built. And I think if we get to a point where, we have the free time to do it, much like I did with Wildwood, where someone is just I want to build out this area, and they can start just tinkering in that space on their own, and eventually it can become an open space. I think Wildwood took a bit of took some pitching around the pit to get people on board. There were a couple of people that were just yes, this is a good idea, we're doing it, and then it just took that little extra oomph for us to turn it into an actual update. So Edith Eldora says, according to the map, that gate leads to Sarner. And yeah, I think the original thought and intent was that Sarner isn't just a cave system, that it is its own city. That was kind of what we were thinking in our minds, as far as what it is. And that road, if we were to ever open that door, could potentially lead to the mountain city of Sarner. So talking about the these assets and whatnot, one of the things that is challenging about working with a set like this too is because it is not incredibly comprehensive. It's very hard to build something that doesn't look like it's just a stack of Lego bricks. We do our best to mitigate that as much as we can. Huh. I didn't realize that was a thing. You learn something new every day. So it can be hard to, kind of not feel like you're Minecrafting it up. Not that there's anything wrong with Minecraft, but it can feel hard to, build a space that feels like it's a natural or intentional thing versus a bunch of bricks slapped together. Well, we're almost to the Elflands. We'll get there. I'm still figuring out the pacing on all of this. This is in response to Tim Bolton saying, like, can we even get through Ered Luin in one go? I think we get pretty close to doing everything in one shot. But I will try to streamline a little bit more for us. So we were talking a little bit about complexity of monster camps and whatnot, and I think the Rath Tareg is an area that is complex for complexity's sake. We kind of had our goals for what we want monster camps to be in terms of interactivity, but I think we kind of built them too much like they were single player game monster camps. So here, we'll do this. Since my goat runs slow, I run faster. So these original camps here were very complex spaces with lots of interactions going on with them. Tripwires and triggers and, not scripted events, but like simple behavioral events to kind of make the space feel a little bit more exciting and dynamic. Things like when you get up to the spider camp, it is a very, can be a very intense space depending on where you go, or how you approach it, or how many other people are there. Yeah, where I'm going, I don't need any goats, and this will hopefully help streamline things a little bit more, speed us along a little bit more. So like this camp here has a bunch of tripwires that like summon in spiders and then set them on patrols and make them like run around, and I think that's been toned down a bit because that kind of experience was really rough for players unfamiliar with the game trying to just like get through the content. And especially since the game ultimately, has become one that's a little bit more friendly in terms of casual play, particularly at lower levels. So one of our designers did come through and gave the landscape of particularly Falothlorn a little bit of a touch-up. He decided, at one point, we were looking at it and it's just like the hills here were just so very steep. And that often led to a problem where like players weren't really seeing much of anything when they were running around doing content. They didn't get to see, couldn't easily see where they were going or where they were coming from. So one of the things that he did was he mellowed out the grade, the slope a little bit, so that camera plays a little bit better for lower level characters. Softsnake asks why elves and dwarves have to share the same region and not create two huge regions like Bree and the Shire. Scheduling and timing. That was purely it. We wanted to, when Lord of the Rings Online pivoted to being Lord of the Rings Online, we wanted to make sure that we had the ability to hit a certain date to launch the game. And that meant that we had to kind of think a little bit about how much intense work we were going to be doing in order to make that happen. And unfortunately, things like where where do the dwarf and elf starter zones kind of exist in all of that? That was one of those things where it's like, well, we can kind of tie them together and make them work together. I think not having a quintessential Shire was kind of a non-starter, and our goal for the epic story was always to kind of funnel everyone into Breland eventually. All roads lead to Breetown, whether or not you're on a goat. So that's kind of the backstory for it. It's not an exciting or interesting backstory, but that's that's where we are. So I do have some unfinished spaces, inaccessible spaces that I think you guys would enjoy seeing. We're at about the 10-minute mark right now before we need to wrap up. So assuming the room is amenable to it, I can start kind of moving ahead onto those things if you would like. One vote for drink, one vote for yes, please. All right, so let's go to my big list of things. So there, like I mentioned, there are a lot of places that exist in this area that are no longer accessible. They were not particularly cleaned up like how we had in other areas. So, for example, here is Sarner. It got far enough along in development that there's even, horses to take you back and forth to certain areas. So Sarner exists. It's on the landscape. But it's not in great shape. Maybe one day, like, the concepts behind it, if we were ever to come to a space like this and, kind of redevelop it for, for an update, a Wildwood style update, like some of the ideas here can be repurposed. But, this is what exists of Sarner now. We've got the summit of Splitfinger, which I'm not quite sure how to. So as you can see here, remnants of terrain having been changed. This looks like it was at one point a series of switchbacks based off of the fencing, but is no longer. But can certainly give an impressive view if we were to ever let players up here and I were to not have a stickied day file. And let's see, where else could we go? So we have another village here. I think this was called Grothmore at one point. But even then, this still does have like remnants of, it was a functional town at one point because we have, horses to things like Gondomar, Thorin's Hall, and whatever Brandarth is. Let's see where this takes me. Oh, teleportation failed. So it's not taking me anywhere, that stubborn horse. But yeah, so these things all exist up in the mountains of Ered Luin. They're just not accessible anymore. And I believe this is northwest of Thorin's Hall. I think this is Thorin's Hall up over here. You can see, the end of the world over there. I think these are the mountains of Evendim, off in the distance. And let's check this out. No, they weren't. None of those were anything across the river from Keladul. You'd think I'd learned my lesson. I was scouting in this area and did the same thing last night. Fell right off the edge. So this is a very, very old and unused dungeon space. Complete with a very, very old set of dungeon cell meshes. This shows off these dungeon spaces a little bit better. It's interesting running around in here and how our philosophy in the heights of ceilings in dungeon interiors has changed. Because these are like, the camera is like really close to the ceiling, in here, and there was a certain point where we made the decision to make sure all of our interiors were a little bit taller in the ceiling, even Hobbit interiors, so that the camera didn't feel like it was pushed in too much on the player. So like coming back into a space like this where the ceiling is so low is just like it's like interesting to me. Like it's just like, oh, I wasn't used to the ceiling being that low before. For good or ill, I think having a camera like that can provide a certain kind of experience to the player while they're in there. It can evoke a certain sort of like claustrophobia, but I don't think that it's something that we really want to have be present all the time. Like we want to be aware of that kind of experience fatigue. All right. There we go. Get us out of these dungeon spaces, and since there seems to have been a lot of requests for the castles across the river, see if we can't get ourselves up there before we close out the stream. I am happy with the rework that was done on this space to just kind of give it a little bit more oomph. So, one of the things I think I want to do for a future one, and we haven't really gone into any of the housing neighborhoods as part of these. I think I'd like to do a housing neighborhood dedicated casual stroll. So at some point we'll do one where we can, at some point we'll do one where we can where we can go through and do that. Because one of the things I really was like happy with the Falloth homesteads was bringing them down so close to the water, and allowing players to kind of look out and see, the rest of the game world, outside of the housing neighborhood. I think Breland and the Shire and by its nature the Thorin's Hall homestead were all very like contained, and Falloth we tried to open it up a little bit. All right, come on. Apologies, I know someone said that vertigo was hitting. So we're now entering unexplored territories. And I am at a loss for where the castle was. The fog doesn't help. Yeah, now I'm a bit lost. Alright, further north. Further north it is, and away we go. One of the tricky things, too, with building a region that has a river as a boundary is making that boundary feel plausible. So for example here, like, we're using the reeds as our impassable, and we've used them as impassables before, so it's not too far-fetched that would be a thing. But we'll trek our way over here, and as you can see just how, like, unpolished and unfinished the space is. There we go. There it is. This may have at one point been a part of Mio, Middle-earth Online design. I certainly don't remember any stories about how it was being built, why it was being built, what its intents or goals were. And I don't think there are any, like, teleport location information indicators regarding it. Yeah, so the other tricky thing with building river impassables is, like, how do we, when you get to a northern or southern boundary, how do we make the impassable implausible? And I think the rocks in the river work well enough, but it is hard to, it's hard to sell that kind of thing in a river. All right, everyone. Well, it is a little bit after 3, so it is time for me to wrap things up. Do a quick check to see if there are any other questions that anyone has before I call it a night. So do want to give you a heads up that the next Casual Stroll is going to be happening a little bit sooner than we usually do. We've been doing these about once a month, but with the release of Gundabad, we wanted to do another one coming soon. So it will be happening much sooner rather than later. So keep your eyes out for that. We've already got it scheduled in our own internal calendars, and there should be announcements for it coming soon. So yeah, last chance for any other questions. I'll give you guys a minute or so for that. Otherwise, I thank everyone for attending, and I know there were bigger and more important things happening in the world of Lotro today, what with Legendary Items and Brawler being out there. So I appreciate you stopping in, checking out Ered Luin with me, asking questions, coping with the day file that is stuck on me right now. But this did give me an idea about where I could go to potentially fix that. Um, so yeah, so when Soft Snake says, when will you fix the buggy skies? Well, if I knew exactly how to fix it, I would fix it. But I do have an idea, because it was raining when we were in Thorin's Hall, so I'm wondering if it has something to do with going in there with a certain day file type not being supported, maybe. So that's something to look at. Um, so we'll go with Ivanar for the last question. I've heard there is a layer of water under the entire map. Is that true? It is not true. The way water works is we can turn it on and off by segment of landscape, by our land blocks, and then we can set the height of it. So in places where we don't have a need for water, we don't have the water turned on. The water is always off in those places. It helps in terms of performance because that's one less thing that the game needs to worry about, because there is a decent amount of calculation that goes into, like, knowing whether or not a player is going to splash or swim, through that space. So not having it there just helps things a little bit. So yeah, when people do have reports of the swimming flight stuff, it should not be related to a specific water layer underneath everything. Anyways, so thank you everyone for your time. Thank you for being here, and I will see you all next time. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the brawler. Have fun with the legendary item system, and we will see you later.